Welcome back in, everybody. Hope you're doing good. Sports and Money, Kansas City Chiefs, 22 off season. It has been fun, and we're just fresh off the NFL draft. I hope most of you enjoyed it. I have no doubts that 99.9% of you Chiefs fans enjoyed every second of the NFL draft. By all accounts, and I try not to parrot other people's work too much. I try to make my work my own, but as I read through other people talking about the Chiefs draft, certainly by all accounts, almost unanimously, everybody seems to agree the Chiefs did an excellent job in this draft. And Kansas City usually does a good job in drafts, so that's not a surprise. They're not perfect by any stretch, but in general, they've done a decent job in their drafts. And I think they did another good job in this year's draft. And I think as Chiefs fans, I'm sure you have every right to be excited coming off of that. And by the way, they should have. You know, when you have this many picks coming off the Tyreek Hill trade, it would be a travesty, right, for them to get rid of a player as good as Tyreek Hill and get that cluster of draft picks and then come away with something disappointing in the draft, something like a B grade in the draft, or people, you know, kind of being a little fuzzy about what you were trying to do. There was no question what the Chiefs were trying to do here, and there's no question that in general, they made smart moves here that almost everybody around the league and even in the media world seems to approve of, myself included. So we're only going to cover the first four picks here today. I'm not going to cover them all today. We're going to cover the first four. But in general, it certainly seems like Kansas City did an outstanding job, and we're going to go through that here in just a second. But I want to lead off with that. Like you can't come off the Tyreek Hill trade, get these cluster of picks, and then blow it in the draft. And certainly they did not do that. They seem to cover a ton of position needs, and they got good, solid players, and they seem to be, for the most part, in the right pools of talent, and I like what they did. So let's get right into it and get started off with it. Trent McDuffie from Washington was their first pick at pick number 21. I want to talk about the trade first, and we'll talk about the player. It was no surprise. We talked about this in the weeks leading up, literally the days leading up to the draft. We talked about this two different times, how there was a very, very good chance that the Chiefs were going to trade up in the first round. Could they have sat there at number 29 and just got the two players they wanted at 29 and 30, just whoever was there? They could have done that, but it just didn't make sense to do that. The smart move here, kind of the obvious move really, was to go ahead and take one of those two picks and move on up somewhere and get the player that you really want, or get one of the players that you really want. As always, I would love to have been in the war room with Kansas City and seen their big board. I would love to have seen the big board for all of these teams and hear the talk for all of these teams, but we don't get that, unfortunately. But it certainly made sense to move up somewhere because you have so many draft picks. You couldn't fit them all on the roster this year anyway. Could you have traded some away for 2023? Sure, would have made perfect sense and would have had no problem with that. There were a number of different ways. I say this every year, there were a number of different ways that the Chiefs could have done this draft, and probably 4 or 5 of them would have been just as good as what Kansas City ended up doing. So I had no problem with this, but for those of you who wanted to do it a different way, there were several ways that Kansas City could have done it. But this moving up to number 21, or somewhere in that area, just seemed too obvious for Kansas City not to do. And it was possible that they didn't do it, but it was just an easy move to do. You take some of those picks, because you can't use them all anyway on this year's roster, and you move up into a higher talent pool. There's no question. There's just no question at all that in general, the talent pool was going to take a step down somewhere around picks 24, 25. It really kind of slimmed down off of that once Malik Willis started dropping down the board. That took up another spot. And then once you made the move at 21 for Trent McDuffie, you didn't need Andrew Booth anymore. So it really started to slim out there very quickly. Right around picks number 22, 23, the talent pool took a decided step downward. And Trent McDuffie was one of those last players, Trent McDuffie and Jermaine Johnson, one of those last players who really seemed to have a legit first-round athleticism, talent, kind of grade, kind of ability. And certainly I think the Chiefs made the perfect move here, the right move. Could you have gone up even further to say number 15? Yeah, you could have. It would cost more. Chiefs didn't want to do that. Could you have gone all the way up into the top 5? Yeah, but I think everybody knew the Chiefs just weren't going to do that. We're going to go pay those kind of high prices. I don't think there's anybody in the top 5 that they couldn't live without. Certainly they're going to live without. But moving up to number 21 and getting Trent McDuffie, you got one of the last really true talented top, first round kind of talent players right there from Washington. Now let's talk about McDuffie. McDuffie, I don't think is going to be your Deion Sanders shutdown kind of a cornerback, but I think he's going to be an excellent cover corner, and those are not easy to come by in the NFL. I think he projects to be even better over time than Charvarius Ward was. Charvarius Ward had gotten to be a very solid kind of a cover corner who could challenge quarterbacks and challenge wide receivers in almost every instance. Now, Ward was not a shutdown guy. I don't think McDuffie's going to be a shutdown guy, but I think McDuffie can be left alone on an island in a number of instances, not the whole game, every game, but I think in a number of instances, by the time you get to McDuffie's late in his first year, certainly in his second year, I think you can leave Trent McDuffie on an island one-on-one in coverage, and I don't think you're going to get beat badly very often, okay? And certainly there are going to be wide receivers who can win the matchup at times, but you needed cover guys. You really needed 2. You got 1, and that certainly fills a massive hole there that the Chiefs had without Tyrann Mathieu being a cover guy at safety and without Charvarius Ward being a good solid cover guy there at cornerback. This fills the biggest need that the Chiefs had. Now, they didn't have to draft a need. No team does, but they got somebody here who filled a need that was going to be very huge for them. And you get a guy who looks like he can be very good here for quite a while. And I know, listen, not all Chiefs draft picks work out. Not all Chiefs cornerback draft picks work out. And not all Chiefs Washington draft picks work out. But I think you have a guy here in Trent McDuffie. He's not just somebody who has to play zone. He is a legit guy who can line up in one-on-one coverage against a lot of different receivers. He is flexible too. He does tackle in the running game, does an excellent job in the running game tackling. But the main thing that you're getting here, the reason you traded up, is not all of those peripheral attributes. It is because he can line up one-on-one in coverage against good receivers and get the job done. Will he be an all-pro kind of guy? I don't think so. It doesn't project that way, but this guy certainly looks like he can be a good quality starter and possibly have a chance at some Pro Bowls here down the line at that cornerback position. I absolutely love it. The trade made sense. We talked about what it might cost to move up to, say, number 20 before the draft. I think we mentioned that it would cost you number 29 and then maybe, either a second-round pick or a third-round pick. It ended up costing number 29, then a third-round pick and a fourth-round pick. So pretty close in the price tag there, maybe just a little bit more than what we figured, but pretty close in the price tag there. And certainly trading up here in the first round was no surprise. And it seemed to make a ton of sense here for Kansas City. And of course, it's a typical Patriots move, right? If you don't like what you got there, why not trade back? And the Patriots doing what only the Patriots could do in trading back and getting Cole Strange there with that 29th pick, and just quite an interesting night for the Patriots on draft night. But the Chiefs did an excellent job here. This was the best move that they could have made, all things considered. Now, just throwing it out there, could you have gotten Jermaine Johnson at defensive end as he slid down the draft board? Certainly you could have, and I know a lot of Chiefs fans who for the past 2 or 3 off seasons have been wanting that speed guy, that athletic edge rusher, and I'm sure grabbing Jermaine Johnson there at 21 was tempting, but ultimately I think the Chiefs got who they wanted, one of the guys that they wanted. And all the wide receivers that they might have gotten were gone. We talked about that, how quickly they were going to go. They went super fast, starting around picks 8 or 9. I don't remember exactly. But those wide receivers were just gone. So anybody that they might have gotten there had completely vanished. You were going to have to trade up pretty high, somewhere around picks 14 and 15 to even get a shot at one of those wide receivers. Chiefs just didn't want to do that. Sitting there at number 21, they feel their biggest need. And they got a guy here in Trent McDuffie who I think can be an excellent part of the defense. Maybe one of the better parts of the defense for 4 or 5 seasons ahead, and not cost them a boatload of money in the process. So this was an important pick. I think it's a good pick all the way around, like the trading up there by the Kansas City Chiefs. And Was it aggressive? Yes, but it's not just about being aggressive. Some people completely overrate that. It's about being smart. And this was the smart move here for Kansas City. You move to number 30. And this is where the Chiefs pick up George Carloftus from Purdue. Again, Carloftus was a guy who could have been drafted higher. He wasn't. We knew somebody was going to fall to 29 and 30. We didn't know exactly who. Turned out Andrew Booth was still sitting there. Turns out George Pickens was still sitting there. Turns out there were a couple of other guys still sitting there. But George Carloftus certainly, I think, fits what the Chiefs do, but more importantly, this is just a good quality defensive end. This is a big guy who has above average speed, who can get to the quarterback with some regularity, and who holds up very well against the run. He's very intelligent. He's athletic enough to play defensive end in the NFL and to do it at, I think, at least a quality starter level. Now, I don't think George Carloftus is going to blow up the league. I don't think he's going to blow up opposing offensive lines. And I really kind of doubt that you're ever going to see him get into the double-digit sack category. That would surprise me. But this is a good, solid, quality starter at defensive end. And I don't want to overdo how much he fits Spagnuolo's offense, because our defense. I think literally every article I read about every Chiefs defensive pick talked about how that player fits Spagnuolo's defense. All right, but let's get to the real point here. Carloftus is just a good defensive end. A number of teams would have liked to have had him, but he was available there at number 30. He would not have lasted much longer. If the Chiefs didn't pick him at number 30, he would have gone very quickly within probably the next 5 picks. So this was one of the guys that did fall to the Chiefs spot. Could you have gotten somebody else? Sure, you could have, but I think this was one of the best 2 or 3 picks that they could have made right here with George Carloftus. Now, I would have been very tempted to take David Ojabo. I'm going to mention Ojabo again here in just a minute, because Ojabo has that very, very fast acceleration off the edge. But George Carloftus is ready to play right now. Carloftus is very consistent. Carloftus has a great work ethic, but he's not just a workout ethic kind of a guy. He does have working speed off the edge. He can work back to the middle. He does hold up against the edge. It reminds me a good bit of what the Patriots do with their defensive lines. They typically don't have a lot of fast edge rushers for the most part. They just like to have good, solid, working defensive linemen all the way across the board. If they can get that huge defensive tackle, that nose tackle, they'll use it. But even if they don't have it, they're just going to line up 4 solid big guys all the way across the front 4. They're going to add in 2 or 3 big linebackers. And the Chiefs are kind of trending in that direction here. And certainly the Patriots don't have anybody like Chris Jones playing defensive tackle. So you line up Frank Clark on one side. You have George Carloftus on the other. You have 2 guys there at defensive end who can get to the quarter, at least get some pressure on the quarterback, and they hold up well against the run. So I certainly like that here for the Chiefs, picking up George Carloftus at number 30. Pick 54, I thought you got a break. And by the way, yeah, some teams are going to get breaks. I thought the Ravens got 2 breaks. I thought you got a real break here that Skye Moore was sitting there at 54. There were some suggestions that Skye Moore might actually slip into that first round. If he didn't, I think a lot of people certainly thought he was going to be right there at the top of the second round. He actually slid all the way down to about the middle of the second round, and the Chiefs are sitting there, and they're able to grab him at pick 54. Skye Moore out of Western Michigan, fast receiver. Certainly one of the guys that the Chiefs had to be thinking about. Now, could you at some point have worked your way into getting Christian Watson or George Pickens? Absolutely. But you get Skye Moore here, who just, I don't want to say he falls in your lap, but he certainly slides down the board enough to where you're not having to trade up a lot of, give up a lot of draft picks to get him. And you get Skye Moore out of Western Michigan, very fast guy. Certainly, you know, is he going to be Tyreek Hill? I doubt it. But can he add to what the Chiefs are doing? And can he possibly be a heck of a headache for opposing defenses to deal with in years to come? Yeah, I think so. You know, you've got him right there with Marquez Valdez-Scantling. You've got him right there with Travis Kelce. You've got him right there with the running backs that the Chiefs don't mind throwing the ball to. You've got him right there with, and I don't even remember who all they've got now. The Chiefs have several guys. Juju Smith-Schuster, we just did the video on him. You know, have a good core of receivers that I think gives you some good depth, certainly gives you a lot of flexibility. And when some of those guys are gone next year, 2023, Skye Moore is still going to be sitting there, very fast wide receiver, and I'm sure they're hoping that he will develop by at least by year 2, by 2023, develop into a guy that Patrick Mahomes trusts throwing the football to, and can become just a huge target for them. So I like that sitting there at number 54. You didn't have to do anything crazy to get Skye Moore. You didn't have to get all wild with that. I certainly like that. Now, you get, and this will be the last thing we cover for today, you get pick number 62, and that has Brian Cook at safety there at Cincinnati. I want to start with this. I like Brian Cook. I think he projects eventually, certainly not in year 1, but maybe by 2023, hopefully by 24, certainly he projects as a decent starting safety in the NFL. I don't think he's ever going to really threaten the Pro Bowl status too often, but I think Brian Cook projects as a decent starting safety in the NFL. You get him at pick number 62. A couple of reasons why I like this pick. Now listen, he's not going to be started for the Chiefs this year unless there's an injury. Juan Thornhill is going to start at one safety. Justin Reed is going to start at the other. That's basically the end of the story. But I like Brian Cook for 2 reasons. Number one, when Juan Thornhill, when his rookie contract is over and the Chiefs may not want to pay him because the salary cap is tight on the Chiefs, and because the Chiefs kind of sort of seem to not be overly in love with Juan Thornhill anyway. Not only because of the injury, but we remember the early part of last year when he kind of inexplicably was sitting on the bench for a while or not getting much playing time for a while. The Chiefs don't necessarily seem to be in love with Juan Thornhill, and this seems to be another indicator of that. So whenever Juan Thornhill's contract, his rookie deal is up, which is going to be sooner rather than later, if you don't want to hand him a lot of money, you certainly have Brian Cook here, hopefully, who development-wise would, in theory at least, be ready to start there for Juan Thornhill. So I like it from that standpoint. Financially, this is a good, smart, look-ahead kind of a move that good, smart franchises like the Chiefs make. It's the kind of move that the Steelers make. It's the kind of move that the Patriots make. It's the kind of move that a lot of these stable franchises make. So this is good, solid stuff. But I also really like it, and this is even better. We just let go of Daniel Sorensen a few weeks ago, who I think, listen, he had some good moments there in Kansas City, but athletically Sorensen was limited a good bit. And Brian Cook, while not an elite athlete by any stretch, Brian Cook brings a lot more athleticism to the position than did Daniel Sorensen. And so you upgrade athletically here, even if Daniel Cook doesn't play a lot this year, or Brian Cook, excuse me, even if Brian Cook doesn't play a lot this year, whatever snaps he gets, those are basically going to be the snaps that Daniel Sorensen would have gotten had he still been on the team. So you lose a little bit in experience. You certainly lose a little bit with Sorensen's knowledge of where everybody on the defense was supposed to be, but I think you're gaining a lot more athletically here, and that's the role that Brian Cook is going to step into. And Chiefs fans know this. He's not taking Tyrann Mathieu's place or anybody else's place anywhere in the major playing time category. But whereas Daniel Sorensen was probably getting too many snaps, I don't remember exactly, 500, 600 snaps, Brian Cook won't be getting that many snaps this year, barring injury, but Brian Cook will be basically taking Daniel Sorensen's place in 3 safety groups or in those special packages where you want to bring in that safety hybrid. Brian Cook can step in here, bring a lot more athleticism in case of an injury or in case of third downs or in case of special packages. Brian Cook is the guy, and so I love it for that reason. Like it from the financial standpoint, love it from the athleticism standpoint. Now, one more thing I will toss in here. If it were me, and again, I don't get paid for this. I do it for free. I sit on the sidelines and I shout out my little opinions. If it were me, I would have traded from 62 up to about number 40 as soon as I saw David Ojabo starting to continue to slide. Now, the Ravens, I think, get their second break of the night when David Ojabo is sitting there and they get him. Why do you love David Ojabo so much? He's got an injury. He may not be ready for all of 2022. It might be 2023. I would have loved, absolutely loved to have seen the Chiefs trade pick number 62 and a couple of other later round picks up to about pick number 40 and grab David Ojabo there. David Ojabo, if you go back and look at the film of him playing last year with Michigan, and listen, all the draft reports talk about how David Ojabo was such a benefactor from having Aiden Hutchinson playing on the other side. Listen, if you watch David Ojabo play, you realize very quickly that Aiden Hutchinson was just as much a benefactor of having Ojabo on the other side as Ojabo was of having Hutchinson. Ojabo was beating people off the edge regularly. It's even faster than Hutchinson off the edge. Doesn't have the moves or the polish that Hutchinson has. But David Ojabo has significantly above average speed and moves off the edge to get to the quarterback, and could do it on his own. Didn't need help from anybody. And there were tons of tape available, lots of tape, not 1 or 2, not 5, not 10. There were tons of tape available where David Ojabo and Aiden Hutchinson, neither one was getting double teamed, and Ojabo was actually getting the quarterback first, okay? There's plenty of tape out there available from the last season of Michigan. You know, you don't have to look far. Go look it all up on YouTube. David Ojabo had above average speed, and for me personally, I would have been willing to wait a season for 2023 to come until Ojabo was back to full speed, and I would have been more than happy to trade up from 62 to 40. You don't get Brian Cook at safety, which I like having Brian Cook at safety, but I think the upside of Ojabo, who a lot of people before the injury had him somewhere in the top 15 of the NFL draft, and I think he can recover from that. A lot of players do. I would have loved to have seen him on the edge. Can you imagine having, in 2023, George Carloftus at one edge and David Ojabo at the other edge? I would have been very excited about that. The Chiefs didn't do that, so I'm not criticizing them, but that's just my 2 cents worth of something else that I would have done. All right, we've covered enough here. We will do more in the weeks to come on these draft picks and on the Chiefs roster throughout the offseason. Thank you so much for watching. Shout out to my mom. Happy Mother's Day to my mom. Love you. All the moms out there. Coming up in just a few days, a week or two. I hope that you all do well, and we'll see you next time. Have a good one. Bye.